Thank you, gentlemen. By the way, after these two, I'm bringing out the entire Senate Foreign Relations Committee for a photo and a group hug. It's going to be unprecedented. Senator Cotton, you heard Senator Murphy, who talks, like many in the Democratic caucus, about the limitations of American power, particularly in the Middle East, but not exclusively the Middle East. That kind of talk, I know from our previous conversations, doesn't sit well with you for a couple of reasons. Do you believe that the Democrats are defeatist on these issues?
Well, the limitations of power that we see today right now are largely self-imposed limitations. We've been cutting our military drastically for the last 6.5 years, and that sends a very bad signal to the rest of the world when we're drawing down our military at a time where the world is growing more dangerous at the macro level. At the micro level, when we see gaps in carrier coverage, for instance, in the Persian Gulf, that also sends a very bad signal to our allies and our adversaries in the region. Ultimately, you know, there's this debate between hard power and soft power. Soft power is very important. It has been since the beginning of our republic. But soft power without power is just softness. We have to have the capability. We have to have the intent to use the capability when our interests are threatened. And that makes it less likely that we have to use that hard power to begin with.
Senator Coons, have your Republican colleagues learned lessons from Iraq to your satisfaction?
I think many have. I think
what about
recognizing,
Senator Cotton?
Well, I'm not yet sure whether Senator Cotton has learned the same lessons from Iraq that others have, but I respect and honor the fact that he has learned firsthand lessons that many in Congress don't know, which is exactly what it means to sign a blank check to the people of the United States and serve in our uniform. So I deeply respect Senator Cotton's service to our nation. And I think the new generation that's joining Congress, having served in the military, both in members and in staff, are bringing a new perspective that was in many ways missing for a long period when the generations that fought the Second World War and fought the conflicts of the Cold War were retiring, and there was a sort of a gap in terms of veteran representation in the Congress. I do think that we need to look at the whole reach and scope of American power, not just military power, but diplomacy and development and so-called soft power. And I think there are ways in which that power is ebbing and is becoming diffuse as the world is becoming more interconnected that we need to be more attentive to. And there's ways in which we can together make smart investments in ensuring not just that we have a robust and capable military, but that we also have a coordinated and complementary diplomatic and development effort. A lot of the conflicts that are currently emerging around the world are emerging in places where there is a humanitarian crisis that is an overlay on the military crisis. What's going on in Syria is just one of many examples. Somalia, for example, Nigeria, for example, on a continent where I've spent a great deal of time, are places where the combination of development problems, humanitarian problems, and security problems reinforce each other. So I do think we need to learn lessons from Iraq, but also lessons from other theaters and other places where the whole suite of American resources has to be put.
Right. Senator Cotton, do you disagree with anything that he said in that regard?
No, I think there is a lot of different tools of national power, but I would say the fundamental tool that enables all the other is military strength and the willingness to use military strength when our interests and our allies are threatened. One of the key lessons of Iraq is that security has to come first. That was a mistake of the Bush administration in the 2003 to 2006 period that since the decision makers have acknowledged. That's why we had the surge. Anyone who was in Iraq in 2006 on the front lines could tell you that without that kind of security, there's not any opportunity for the development of political reconciliation or economic growth or anything else. And you're seeing that now play out again in Iraq and other places around the world.
I want to talk about Syria and Ukraine, but in Iraq, in many ways, for this conversation, is patient zero. Do you think Iraq was winnable, Senator Coons?
I don't think the conflict understood as building a new nation post-Saddam Hussein was winnable with the scale of resources that we were willing to put into it.
But no, I mean, in theory, could it have been won by the United States with better leadership and better planning?
Absolutely. I mean, it was possible. I'm not going to say up front that that was not possible.
So can I extrapolate from that if we had the will? And
but at a cost that I think exceeds our willingness.
We'll talk about Syria and that.
Well, I just want to say that not only do I agree with Chris that it is winnable in theory, I would say that it was largely won in 2011. And President Obama and Vice President Biden claimed that as one of their signal successes in 2011. Unfortunately, I think we've squandered that. We could have had in effect, a victory in Iraq for 2011 if we hadn't shortchanged security in the early days of the Iraq War. But war always takes a long and winding path. I mean, President Lincoln didn't expect that he was going to be fighting a civil war for 4 years, I would imagine. But the Iraq War is not just winnable, it ultimately was won. I would say, though, that we snatched defeat from the jaws of victory in 2011.
But Senator Cotton, let me just ask you this, because you were in a minority, I think, in America, as current-day America, in believing that America should do all of the things that you believe it should be doing. Why should America be the world's policeman?
Well, I would take that analogy to say you look at a policeman and most people think about him stopping crime. But the more important job a policeman has to do is to deter crime. The cop on the beat who understands what's happening in his neighborhood, who is there as a reassuring presence to the peaceful and the good, who is there to deter the wicked, and who ultimately is there to stop and punish those who act on that wickedness. That doesn't mean that we can intervene everywhere in the world, but it does mean that as the global superpower, we have global responsibilities. In many places, that is military. In many places, as Chris said, it's economic or humanitarian or diplomatic or so forth. They're trying to build alliances that can largely fend for themselves. But what you see around the world when America withdraws or retrenches is not a return to a natural state of order and stability. It's the natural state of disorder and instability.
Senator Coons, there are very few Democrats who would say that America should be the world's policeman. Where do you come down on this? And specifically, I'm not talking about the soft power stuff. I'm talking about, how much of a presence do we have to maintain in the three most vital regions of the world, Europe, Middle East, and Asia? Are we the guarantors? And do you think that President Obama has reset our relationship with those regions to our detriment, as Senator Cotton does?
I mean, we've got significant challenges in all three regions, obviously. Russia's aggression into Ukraine and annexation of Crimea, the significant challenges in Iraq and Syria and with Iran and their nuclear ambitions, and an expansionist China and the potential for real conflict in the South China Sea, I think are really straining our ability to be as engaged as we need to be. The world's policeman implies, I think, a mindset that says we should go in with military force absolutely everywhere. But an effective policing strategy is a preventive policing strategy that recognizes that it's very rare that a SWAT team's breaking down a front door to shut down a crack house. You have to, in order to provide security, which is our core goal, stability and order for the world, you have to support everything that makes a rule of law work. So you have to embrace multilateral institutions that provide the framework for rule of law, that provide for security and development for other countries on their own terms to avoid that return to the sort of state of nature. And you have to partner closely with other allies so that they're bearing some of the cost and some of the sacrifice involved in pushing back against expansionist powers like Putin's Russia.
Senator Cotton, you're not...
Well, let me even say, I don't think Chris and I are disagreeing here in terms of, if you're talking about a policeman's role, then it doesn't always or even usually look like what happened in Iraq or Afghanistan in the last 10 years. It doesn't look like even what happened in, say, the tanker wars in the 1980s with Iran. It largely is a matter of presence and leadership, having carriers in the East Asia theater, having carriers in the Mediterranean, the Persian Gulf, having troops deployed in Germany throughout the Cold War to maintain a presence in Europe. We invest in our military and we have them forward deployed around the world, so we hopefully don't have to use them to begin with.
Senator Coons, I want to ask you something about something that Senator Cotton, when Senator Cotton came to a lot of people's attention when he led the effort to write an open letter to Ayatollah Khamenei, warning him about, teaching him essentially about the American constitutional process as Senator Cotton understood it. First of all, what was your reaction when you heard about this? And second, talk about the role of Congress in oversight of our foreign policy.
I think it was regret that he was the only Democrat that didn't join us.
Yeah.
Or that he wasn't the only Democrat to join us.
I can admire the senator's boldness, even if I disagree with what
Could you guys stop with the gentleman from Arkansas and the gentleman from Delaware stuff and just...
I'm not allowed to be the gentleman from Delaware?
Yeah, you can be the gentleman from Delaware if you need to
But
be.
the whole sentence is, I can admire his boldness while really disagreeing with what I think was its impact. I, too, have sent letters to foreign heads of state as a senator on the Foreign Relations Committee, but always when consulting with our State Department and with my colleagues on the committee, Republican and Democrat. I think the Congress has a critical role to play in oversight of the implementation of this deal. As I've said, both at the University of Delaware and at the Carnegie Endowment, after coming to a decision to support the deal, it's with some real concerns. I think there are some real challenges in the short term, the middle term, and the long term in how this deal plays out if, in fact, it's fully implemented. We can expect the Iranians to cheat. They have a long history of cheating both in flagrant ways and in marginal ways. We can expect them to use some of the proceeds of sanctions relief to try and fund terrorist organizations in the region and promote destabilizing activities. And we can foresee in 10 to 15 years they're having industrial scale enrichment capability that is significantly threatening to the stability of the region and the world. And the Congress has to be engaged over a long period of time in restraining and deterring all three of those actions. But I still think having 12 tons of enriched uranium go out of their hands and having real-time 24/7 surveillance of their known and declared nuclear facilities is better than the alternative.
While I'm sure that our audience doesn't want us to relitigate the Iran deal, I should give you a minute to respond to that. And I want to sharpen it and maybe also broaden it by asking this. It seems as if the Democrats on Iran and maybe other issues are worried about the behavior of regimes. It seems as if the Republicans are more concerned about the character of regimes. In other words, when you worry about the character, you don't think that there's a deal to be made because of the very nature of the regime. Democrats seem to be thinking, okay, they could be bad, but I have a way of roping them in. Is that a fair understanding of a crucial difference between the way the Democrats and Republicans understand treaties and understand Obama administration diplomacy?
Well, I would say, character leads to behavior. Character is destiny. It's destiny for individuals, but also for regimes
as well. But behavior can be controlled.
It can be
from outside by the outside.
And I would argue that this deal does the opposite of control Iran's behavior towards Iran's behavior. They're going to get up to $150 billion in sanctions relief, and they give groups like Hezbollah maybe $1 billion, maybe $2 billion. Just think about what that'll mean after they spend all their money on hospitals and swimming pools, as some administration officials said they would. We are rewarding their behavior, and you're starting to see the consequences of those rewards already. The nuclear consequences of this deal are by far the most grave, but they're also longer term. There's the immediate geopolitical consequences. For example, Benjamin Netanyahu had to fly to Moscow last week. I don't know what they discussed, but I would assume it had something to do with Iraq's continued shipment of rockets into Hezbollah and what it means to have Russian surface-to-air missiles in Syria when Israel has been interdicting those shipments. For the first time in 40 years now, a country like Israel has to worry about Russian presence on the battlefield in defending its core national security interests. In part, I would say, because of the immediate rewards we gave to Iran in this deal.
Do you want to deal with that behavior? I'll point at you.
I would say Chris's speeches at Delaware and on the Senate floor were, very eloquent. I could cut and paste a few words from it and have made it my own speech, just the support to oppose.
Which words in particular?
Take out support.
Yes versus no that was the key word.
But Chris's speeches outlined a lot of the same concerns I had. I wish I could have persuaded him to see it.
Is that a fair split to say that the Democrats believe that you can, through treaty and international organizations and international oversight, actually curtail the behavior of nefarious regimes?
Yes. And at the end of the day, my gut reaction to this complex situation and difficult deal was, if we are going to end up having to use military force to take out Iran's nuclear weapons program or to deter its nuclear ambitions, I would far rather do it having tried diplomacy seriously first and with all of our key European allies on our side and with us in that effort, and with the intelligence that we're going to get from the inspections, then do it now with none of those alongside.
But let me just correct the record, because you said treaty and this was not a treaty.
No,
if it was a treaty,
an agreement.
It would have been
Absolutely.
Let me ask you this, Senator Cotton, very quickly. How is your path on the Iran deal not going to lead to war or confrontation, military confrontation between the United States and Iran?
Well, I would have gone back far beyond just the last 3 or 4 months. I wouldn't have started the negotiations with them.
No, but I'm asking you to deal with the reality that you and the Senate were handed was there was the deal that the executive branch negotiated, and then there was no deal. Given the choices, you went for a no deal. How would your choice not have led to a confrontation?
Well, it is possible that it would have. But
And that's okay.
Well, throughout human history, you see time and time again that if you're not willing to confront a threat or a disorder in the early stages, when it becomes intractable, you usually have to confront it in the later stages when it is graver and more serious to confront. That's not to say it's that military choice or military force is the first option, but it has to remain an option. And until Iran recognizes the United States and our allies like Israel and Gulf states are going to be key players in the region, and until they renounce their efforts to try to kill us and to kill our allies, then it's going to remain a mortal threat to the United States. And it may ultimately one day lead to military conflict. I worry that military conflict could be much harder because of the presence of more conventional weapons in the region, and ultimately it could be nuclear because of the presence of nuclear weapons in the region.
Do you have a quick interjection?
Just to your earlier point, I think it was a Republican president who denounced the evil empire, yet was able to reach important nuclear arms agreements with them to restrain the threat and the scope of the Soviet nuclear arsenal. I do think it is possible to see a regime as evil and to oppose their values and their actions, yet come to a diplomatic resolution that improves our security.
Well, and I would agree, but Ronald Reagan did many other things, like deploying medium-range missiles to Europe or confronting Soviet expansionism in places like Afghanistan, and only sitting down at the very end of a long period of time in which he was confronting him in those ways. And finally, this situation is different as well. The Soviet Union already had thousands of warheads. We were on rough parity with them. Therefore, those agreements were going to be a roughly equal outcome. We had this much power, Iran had this much power, yet the results of that deal were like this.
Let me, and I could do this all day, as you know, but we do have very little time left. And since I have Senator Coons here, I want to ask a question. Joe Biden, tell us what you think is going to happen and if you will support him if he actually goes and runs, since you are a senator from Delaware.
I would support Biden Coons, except the Constitution doesn't allow it.
I've said to him in person and I've said publicly that I would campaign for and enthusiastically support the vice president. I campaigned for him in Iowa in 2008. I think he is one of our most seasoned, most senior voices on national security and on foreign policy. He chaired the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. He has seen many of the current challenges in the world develop over decades, and I think is a well-grounded person to be our national leader. But he also has in his gut a passion for the middle class and an ability to fight for them. But he and his family are in a very difficult place to take on the rigors of a presidential campaign. And I just pray for them that they will take the time and really make the right decision.
Do you think
for them as a family?
What about your personal opinion?
I do not know what he will. I was just with him for several hours earlier this week. I do not have any special insight. I think he's fully capable of being a successful candidate. I think if this were a few years from now and the sharpness of Bo's passing had a chance to heal, he'd already be in it. But I think he is, as someone who is first a family man, I think he is very wisely hesitating to make sure that he and his family are ready for a campaign.
And Senator Cotton, who's your candidate?
Well, the risk of offending some of my colleagues in the Senate, I strongly support Bernie Sanders in the Democratic primary.
All right. And with that, we thank you very much and have a good day.